Welcome, Culturati community. In this session, we're going to explore the new business imperative. Why is it important to make your company a community, especially as we forge ahead into hybrid work? Hi, I'm Matthew Duncan. As a Culturati strategic advisor, my role in the culture movement is to be a catalyst at the intersection of human performance and technology. I've dedicated my work and energy in the areas of well-being, innovation, employee experience, and most critically, in the future of work. And today, I'm over the moon to have a conversation with Desiree Motamedi. She is a market maker, an employee experience advocate, and a leader at workplace at Facebook. And welcome, Desiree.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm really excited to be here.
Great. I'm definitely excited to dive in. But first, tell us a little bit about your background and what you're passionate about.
Well, I've been a marketer for probably 20 plus years now. I grew up in the Bay Area, and I actually been very lucky to work with some amazing companies from Adobe to Google to now Facebook. I've been doing B2B marketing my entire life. In fact, enterprise is kind of like my thing. And I would say I'm passionate about my two boys. I have a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old. And I would say in the last year, especially during COVID, we've gotten very close. And I've had to do a lot of playing with cars and lots of boy activities, as you can imagine. So it's been a really fun year, even though during this crazy time.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I have three sons myself, and so we could swap a lot of really interesting boy stories.
We can. I love that.
The challenges just get bigger as they get older, but they're amazing to have.
That's wonderful.
Well, good. Well, let's get started and really start with where we are today, right? There's no doubt this pandemic has thrusted company culture to the spotlight. But how are you seeing organizations really respond to it?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. I feel like we're really entering this reality of hybrid work and something that we're all really trying to figure out right now. So a lot of companies are really trying to double down on this theme around employee experience. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people are asking like, well, what does employee experience really mean? And it's really about a systematic way of how you approach your employees and really designing a creative way about what their meaningful work is on a daily basis. So it's really about changing behavior. It's also about changing culture. So things like trust, honesty, and belonging. And, a lot of people think that employee experience is really tied to HR, but it really is about everyone within the organization. So we've also seen that employee experience has some challenges, especially with this whole hybrid work environment. Now that teams are dispersed, they're hard to reach. And there's always these risks with approaching hybrid work in general, from poor communication to classism, like us versus them, in-office biases. And so I think employee experience, to really win now in this new hybrid world, there's kind of 3 things that people have to focus on. The first one is really around communicating efficiently. So you want to be able to reach anyone, everywhere with relevant information and hear what they have to say. And then number 2, which I'm a big believer in, is building community, diversity and inclusion. And then the third one, which is also very important, is showing care. Finding simple ways to support mental health or making sure that knowledge is really easy to find and share.
The employee experience factor is definitely a critical sort of consideration when you're an organization, especially as we transition to this hybrid world. But I think that a lot of organizations might say they're already proven their communication and they've already got standards in place. So why have those changed, or how do they need to change?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that we're starting to see as well too, this unveils like a bigger challenge for organizations right now. It's really around their comms infrastructure. It's like, they have already systems that are in place, but I think that the biggest issue is, are people using it? And if people are not really using it, is it really working for them? So I think the number one thing that people should be doing is really finding out what are the current adoption rates of the platforms they're using to communicate with their employees. Get a true picture of what's really working and what's not working today.
And is that adoption rate? I mean, one would say we all feel a little bit overwhelmed. So it's also about really getting specific on how do you break through the noise or really connect with people at the right time in the right place.
Yeah, I would say that as well too. I mean, it's interesting because we actually have data within Facebook. So we use Workplace at Facebook as well too. And one thing that we try to do is think about when are people the most engaged in their daily work life, that we do post at a certain time so we make sure that people can see it. Or we also have some tools where it's like mark is important so that they can actually make sure it's a notification that they can see in their top of their inbox. So yeah, time is definitely a big factor, and also just making sure that you're saying the right things as well too. So it's a combination of both.
You mentioned before about community leading to belonging, which of course, this is a real important consideration and concern, frankly, inside organizations today. People don't feel like they actually belong. And actually, people of color feel less inclined to that sort of inclusiveness within the organization. So, talk a little bit about how you think about community building.
Yeah, community is the fabric of Facebook. So it's really important to us and also for even workplace. And the first thing that really starts with community is about promoting it through your communication. And you really want to be able to reduce silos to enable like these wider community creations. So I'll give you an example of how we do this today. We really create different skill-based or functional or organizational groups to encourage this open dialogue or shared experiences. So at Facebook, we have a Black ACT group, we have a Women's ACT group, we have an LGBTQ group. The groups are insane here. We have so many of them, but it really gives a sense of a subgroup that you belong to. And it really kind of creates this dynamic where you have a set of people that you can kind of almost rely on a little bit. They're like your go-to to be able to ask questions or to also just feel like you have a support system in place, which is so important. The other area that I think is super important is really encouraging community through predetermined activities. So an example that we do here at Facebook, we have a mentor-mentee program or group, and it really enables this opportunity to have like a shared experience to talk about development, could talk about their growth within an organization, or hey, they're dealing with a certain issue or whatever it may be. But those virtual mentoring experiences that are happening now because of COVID are very, very powerful. So we really kind of share these activities on an ongoing basis, not just like this mentoring program, but many different types of activities across the org, which is super important. And then the last one, of course, is around diversity inclusion, which you just mentioned. And this one is by far the most important. And I just mentioned to you that we have these groups already within our company as well too. But the big thing that people have to really think about is really listening to these voices. This is where you take the thoughts of these groups and put them into a point of view. And it puts a perspective that really can be converted to some solutions about how you bring D&I issues that are faced within your organization and really kind of solving them in a much broader way. So I'm a big believer that community starts with groups, and you want to make sure that people feel they have that sense of belonging. It's super, super important within a company.
Yeah, it reminds me of like employee resource groups, right? Bringing together folks, but it feels like with today's technology, we can actually extend and expand that. So people from, frankly, all over the world could come together with a like interest or a like background to really create sort of unity and belonging together.
100%. It's so important.
So the other point you made was about caring. And, I had the opportunity to speak to several CHROs the other day. And in that discussion, we really uncovered this mutual concern around middle managers and frontline workers. And it was really around, wow, it's never been more stressful in that sort of managerial role. And how are we going to really truly support and care for those folks in this trying time? And then how do we take that forward?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, myself included, especially when, COVID hit last year, the number one thing that I thought about was the well-being of my team. And it was so top of mind for me because everyone was put in the situation on a global basis. And then you're trying to navigate what works and what doesn't work. And it's really, really hard. And I would say there were kind of a few things that I really did early on. And I think that people tend to forget, but it's so important. And the first one is really around recognition.
Hmm.
And the reason I say recognition is so important is that, you usually when you're in the office, you can say, hey, good job. You did a great job on that presentation. But now in this virtual world, it's like, it's hard to be able to like give those little nods of like, hey, you did a great job on XYZ. Sometimes it's nice to like do it in a chat saying, hey, great job, or thank you for doing, working on that presentation, or thank you for doing XYZ as well too. And it's so important because people tend to forget how much recognition means to an individual. So I would say that's like number one, that has to happen. The second really is around doing care check-ins, and I'm a big believer of that. Even before pandemic, and now even post pandemic, even more so. That it's so important that when you start a conversation with someone, it's just by asking, "How are you doing?" And really making it more personal versus about their day-to-day jobs and just getting right to the meat of like what they have to do from a work perspective. And the reason being is that showing that care is so important because it's showing that you really value that person and that you really want to make sure that they're doing okay. And then the third, but not the least one, is really around engagement. Right when COVID happened, we kind of dropped all of our objectives for the half and said, hey, we're going to start over and like really focus on some key things. And we met every single day. And I know that's crazy to ask everyone to do this, but in the beginning, we wanted to make people feel like they were engaged as part of this, group of our team. We now have changed that because we can't meet every day, as you can imagine, but we now meet on Mondays and Fridays. And it's really been great because we have the beginning of the week where we do like, these are the things that we're focused on. And at the end of the week, we kind of see how things were progressing. I even tried to change the team dynamic to do it once a week, but everyone was like, no, we love this 2 day a week kind of check in. And it also allows the team to feel like they're engaged as part of the conversation of the things that we're working on. They can bring up any issues. And it's been a nice way to do it with the team overall. So I'm a big fan of that. But I also want to mention that we don't want to forget that, even before the pandemic, normal wasn't really working for the majority of our employees. We actually have data that shows that 58% weren't really satisfied with their day-to-day work. Then COVID came along and it really accelerated two trends that were already emerging. So the first one was really about understanding that businesses need to work for their employees, not just working for customers or their stakeholders. And then the second one is really around this move of like fixed work. So being like in the office to this new hybrid model, right? Where now you have companies that are comprised of like not only some people who are still coming to the office, but frontline and also remote workers. So 2020, in my eyes, was really about reacting, to this crazy situation that we had by really focusing on some of these short-term improvements on improving, culture and the work arrangements. But I think 2021 will really about cementing these changes permanently going forward for as part of like the business strategy and operations for every company around the globe.
Well, and as a result, we've seen the acceleration of technology and platforms that allow us to actually make those connections happen, pulse our teams to really get the insight and inputs. And I think organizations are just more apt to adopt and sort of put put prioritization behind these technologies. So I'm going to actually be able to utilize them and scale. Are you
Yeah.
seeing that to be the case as well?
Oh, 100%. I mean, it's so fascinating to see that this has just accelerated all of these things in motion that I kind of chuckled to myself because we're in the business, of course, of connecting people at work. But beforehand, I don't think people really saw the value of it. But now it's just exasperated it. It's like they have to do this to kind of keep up. So yes, I mean, every company that we talk to now, it's no longer it's like a nice to have, it's a must have, which is, just it's so nice to hear that because they really are putting employees first, which is so important.
Right, right. And I think, let's switch a little bit of like, let's move forward, right? So how do we take this forward? And in my conversations and my experience with people leaders, it really is a head scratcher of like, okay, great, we kind of got through, we maintained and sort of stabilized, as you pointed out. Now we actually need to progress. We are going to move into a hybrid world. We need to go through this digital transformation, and we need to adopt many of the things you just talked about, the way we communicate, the way we collaborate, the way we care for. So help us understand and paint us a picture of like where that technology possibility is going.
Yeah, I think it's going to be even more so around trying to fix some of the inherent things now that we're now in this new hybrid situation. So I'll give you one example of something that I think everyone has tried to face in the last year. The first one is like employee onboarding. We had a crazy amount of people who started during COVID, and I commend everyone who did so, because imagine that they start their workday with a little box and a little person on the other side. And you can only imagine for someone to kind of get the lay of the land of what they're doing on a day-to-day basis, especially just learning how to navigate their new job, but also just trying to figure out who they have to work with, who are all the, their colleagues, meeting people. All of that was transformed because now they're working from home. So I think employee onboarding is going to be a really interesting area that people are going to start to think about. And how they're going to, hopefully make it a lot more seamless for people to really figure out how they navigate in those first, 30, 60, 90 days. That's an area that I think that could be really interesting as technology starts to advance, and trying to think of those things like checklist, or being able to make sure that you know who to reach out to, and making it a little bit more automated than it is today. Because right now you're basically getting, details from someone within your, your group telling you, hey, these are the things you should focus on. But imagine that technology can actually help you get there faster as well.
Are there any other interesting sort of examples that come to mind on organizations that are taking this kind of innovative approach?
One, I just, this is one that I just love the story. So one of our customers is Virgin Atlantic, and Shai Weiss is the CEO. And he's been with Workplace probably for the last 5 years. He's been here from the beginning, where he's been here with us for a while, which has been great. And what I love about Shai is that he saw the value of understanding his employee base very early on, and he really understood the value of a connected company, and I'll explain what I mean by that. Virgin, as you can imagine, during the pandemic had to go through a very trying time. They had to furlough a lot of their employees. They had to really kind of figure out, not only from like on the ground, how to kind of operate in this new world, but then also making sure that they were communicating on a daily basis, because again, all these changes of furloughing as well too. So Shai was basically on a daily basis doing a video stream or a post, and he really wanted to engage with people that were on the front line. They're actually in the airplane, to people that within the organization, within like the company itself as well too. So he was such a futurist already, with understanding the value of being connected. And I would say the more importantly, he's also paving the way about how to be an authentic leader and communicate on an ongoing basis. I think that's so important, especially during COVID. And a lot of companies, I would say, would really feel that they were really disconnected during this time because of COVID. They didn't know what was happening at the top, from like what the CEO was thinking or their managers were thinking. And I think that Shai has really embodied how to make that happen for others. And it's interesting, Shai is not the only one. There were a lot of C-level folks that we worked with before COVID that really saw that value. They really wanted to have that connection with employees. But now, even more so, because of this technology, they've really embraced it in a much, much more sophisticated way, but more beautiful way too, because, even during when things are really tough, they used it as a way to make sure that they felt that the company knew exactly what was happening on a daily basis. So I I think it's a really powerful thing to have that tool at your disposal, and not only having him as a leader, but his entire comms leads and his entire organization kind of be part of that movement. So yeah, really exciting.
I love that story, right? It's also about not only the technology that becomes the enabler to make that happen, but the sort of fortitude of leaders who are becoming more transparent, more vulnerable, more authentic to their people, which moves cultures. And frankly, being a little pointed, the recent news coming out of Wall Street type of organizations that are not doing that for their people. Yeah. It's so great to hear a story that organizations are doing that. I mean, one of the things we pride ourselves at Culturati is a community that's really talking about playbooks. Like, how do you do that, right? So those are great examples. So help break down a playbook for a leader who would really like to deliver on the promise of the employee experience.
Yep, we have a lot of good tidbits on this, so this is good. Great. So I would say the first one, especially now in this new hybrid workforce arena, I would say that the first is really around sharing the value of being connected. And what I mean by that is like letting your executives know that being more active and engaging employees is really worth it. And we have stats that really show that as you get more connected, meaning that the entire company is part of this platform where they're able to communicate and share ideas, that they see more profitability. They also see less staff turnover. A lot of our retailers that we work with have seen that the minute that they started using a platform like Workplace, really saw significant less staff turnover. And you can only imagine, especially for hourly workers or frontline workers, that's a very big issue for a lot of folks around the globe. I would say the second area is really about getting the team together. So you don't want to put all the responsibility on the CEO. You really want to recruit from across the ranks on the senior leadership team. So everyone has a role to play, as you can imagine. So as I said, it's like whoever has that domain expertise on certain areas, let them be the front and center for that. And then the third is really around employing or empowering, I would say, early adopters. So some executives will get it quicker than others, be honest with you. So encourage them to lead by example and almost try to hopefully teach other executives on how to make that happen. And then I would say assign areas of expertise, as I just mentioned. I think really supporting and empowering these senior execs to own topics that they feel really passionate about. So if there's someone who's really interested in D&I, or someone who's really great at like showing recognition to their team, let them really kind of be the face to those areas. And then also show them what good looks like, inspire people with good examples of open and authentic communication, either from inside your company or from the outside world. And it's so funny, I was thinking about this recently. Do you remember a while ago, there was that BBC anchor who had his daughter who came in, and the wife that ended up pulling the daughter, yes, away from that situation. Well, what's fascinating is that's normal now. And I think that's authentic, and that we're all, trying to do this job from our homes. And, I've got 2 little boys. I'm surprised they haven't tried to run through the room already. But, that authenticity is so important. And again, even though it's, good doesn't always have to be perfect, I think is what I'm trying to say. I think it's really important to just be yourself. And I think people really relate to that.
Yeah. And you keep hearing more and more about like leaders really modeling that because, I think a large part of the unemployed population doesn't believe it until they see it. So one of the interesting stories I just heard recently was with GitLab. The head of HR was speaking of how she really encouraged her leaders to take time off. So they were actually having a day away, a family fun day, family and friends day. And the CEO literally was sending out communication. I am now gaming with my son. See us on the couch, because people don't believe it unless you actually are there. So seeing is believing sometimes.
I agree 100%.
So let's turn the lens a little bit on Facebook. Now, we know that you've got a stellar reputation when it comes to working with many enterprise brands, but how is really the employee experience inside of Facebook? And what are you guys doing to really bring that to life?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that a lot of people don't know this, but Workplace from Facebook was actually a hack, and I'll give you some background to this. I've been at Facebook for almost 6 years, and when I first started, there was no Workplace. We actually used to use our personal Facebook feed for communicating with our employees, and so very early on, we realized that everyone was on Facebook, and we decided that we probably need to figure out a separation between work and personal. And so there was this hack where someone had this idea of kind of separating the two. And so that's actually how Workplace kind of came to existence. But we use Workplace in everything that we do. And it's basically the way that we communicate from the top to bottom. And so starting, right at the top with Mark Zuckerberg, we have a weekly Q&A that's a longstanding tradition where, especially after COVID, we had to switch from being in person doing the Q&A to now a live stream. And we saw huge engagement with that right off the bat. Whereas before people were coming in person and watching the on demand, the live stream was just beginning, the numbers were probably 10x of what it was before. But it wasn't just, from, top down communications. We had to use, communications for like some of our events that we have. We have a big summit. It's called GMS Summit, where it's our ads and marketing sales teams come together, close to 10,000 people, and we had to make it now virtual. These are usually in-person summits that we do at Moscone Center in San Francisco, and so we had to really kind of create a really interactive experience into this virtual experience as well too. We do all of our team meetings. We post notes, we talk about product strategy, we share, roadmaps, you name it, basically all on this platform. But I would say the number one thing that we use, Workplace for is really about this notion about intentionality. And this is why groups are such a foundation to everything that we do in our comms. So it's really about, you want to be able to show structure. So an example is we use it for our company-wide, org-wide, team-wide, department-wide, and manager report-wide. We use, Workplace to be able to really kind of divide and structure how we actually communicate to all the different teams within the company. So I have a marketing organization and I have a group dedicated just for my team, and then the group that I report into and the group that they report into, and that's really how we communicate across the org. The other one is really about focusing on manager groups. While the info on Facebook can go straight from top to bottom, of course, managers play such an important role on landing these messages at the local level. So there has to be a really specific strategy to communicate with them during the pandemic. You can only imagine there's action points and talking points. And so they really shared that within these groups for managers. But not only do groups provide a feedback loop for like comments and reactions, employees will also then fill in the gaps with any of the grassroots, groups that they've created as well too. And comm strategy, it isn't just a one and done thing. There's static and dynamic and sync and async, and I'll explain what that means. So an example is my team is based in London, and the time difference is 8 hours, 7 hours right now because we're in Pacific Daylight Time. But when you want to be able to communicate, you can't always do it in chat because they might be sleeping. So being able to post and then get people to react to that post when they're up at their time is so important, because not everyone is going to stay up 24 hours to be able to respond in that time. So that whole point of static and dynamic is really an important piece, and sync and async as well too. So I think that we've now figured out a methodology where with early comms with groups, it's like what we know now. And then you have more structured comms where you have something called knowledge library, which is where you can actually have updates on policies or updates on like how your health benefits are, or whatever it may be. So you really can see that groups is really that dynamic play, whereas you have a place where you can get information, like an intranet of sorts, where you can get information for. So super important for the broader org.
Yeah, I'm very intrigued with how you explain groups and how groups lead to communities. And I just think it's the way we're going to continue to evolve. And as we think about, this hybrid work, that's how we're going to stay connected. That's how we're going to stay productive. And as many of the conversations I've been having recently, that's how we're going to stay innovative and creative. Like those two factors are becoming more and more important. How do you do that in this world where we are disconnected? I think finding your way in those groups is going to be really, really, really important. So, our time is kind of wrapping up here, but I want to ask you one last question.
Yes.
What is that negative advice that you would share with leaders who are truly trying to create a community?
My number one thing, and I've seen this time and time again, where I really see this shine is really about being yourself and authentic. We work with Mindy Grossman, who's the CEO of Weight Watchers, and
Mhm.
she talked about how she has all these different, locations around the globe, and having her leaders really be themselves and talk about their values, what's important to them, and just being themselves has really kind of resonated throughout their organization. And I have to say, even at Facebook, we have that same kind of mantra, be your authentic self. And I think that it's so important to kind of show who you are. I think it's people think that sometimes you're buttoned up and behind a desk, and you have to always be yourself, and or present yourself in a different way. And I have to say that showing who you really are really kind of breaks down the barriers a little bit. It also just shows your more human side of who you are, and what you believe in. And I think that is so important in this new world. So that would be my number one advice, I would say, for everyone.
That's such a beautiful message to share with everyone, and hopefully one of the things we really can take away is all of us being a little bit more human, human to ourselves and human to each other. And I want to thank you. This has been a
Oh,
really great conversation. I've
thank
really
you.
enjoyed it. Thank you
Oh,
for being
great. I
part.
really appreciate it too. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me. I really hope to
Absolutely.
do it again.
You got it. You got it. Take care, and we'll talk soon.
Take care. Bye bye.